Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Dan Winter again from fractalu.com. Tonight's conversation and course is about BioActiveField.com, the electrical understanding of what creates bioactive fields, how to make them, how to use them, how to apply them commercially, and the deep kind of spiritual as well as philosophical implications of bioactive fields and why bioactive fields in a way have dominated even the story of religion through history, and that if we understood bioactive fields better, we could use a spiritual tradition in a new, more self-empowered way. That's the hermetic intention behind tonight's course. In fact, we might dedicate this evening to Hermes, Thoth Tahuti, in the sense of the caduceus being the shape of the wave, which in physics is called phase conjugation, the core of fractality. So we have a small group here this evening, but we're going to have lots of questions and lots of fun, and these films are typically seen by at least 1,000 people in the first week and go around the world and become part of a very complete curriculum on fractal field science. And we're pleased that this course series has been such a success. So we're going to start this evening's conversation with trying to use very practical examples of how bioactive fields work in order to then make it more interesting to discuss the science, the electrical engineering. It's very observable that seeds germinate so dramatically better under certain electrical conditions. Actually, a couple months ago here in South France, we had some squash seeds that I needed to do something with. We had beautiful homegrown squash, and it was time. And so we planted them in the pots out here. There's two big pots just outside this picture window right there, actually. And one of the series of seeds I planted, and within hours there was a huge electrical storm, and those seeds came up gangbusters. I mean, it was amazing. I'd never seen, and you know, the soil right here in the Pyrenees is not that wonderful, so I was pretty impressed. And then about, I don't know, less than a week later, some days later, I planted in a very similar pot, just on the other side the window, similar seeds, and I got almost nothing. And I realized the difference was that electrical storm. So what was it about the electrical negativity of lightning, the negative ions, and the triggering effect of an electrical storm that so much triggered those seeds? This is the heart of our curriculum tonight, is to really understand in practical terms what it is electrically that's the difference between life and death for a seed. Because then we can apply that to all kinds of mysteries, like how does the stages of the moon affect seed growth, which is so dramatically proven, and how does Agnihotra plasma flame ritual affect seed growth, and how bioactive fields in general work if we can understand the difference between life and death for a seed. So I'd like to suggest that you imagine a seed as a kind of electrically generating wormhole. You know, the center stuff in a seed, the kind of liquid that in which a charge field is mediated in a seed, is called plasm. Very similar to our word plasma, or a cloud of charge. And we believe a cloud of charge, which is traveling essentially toroidally, inhabits the plasm, the germ of the seed. And so effectively, a way to think about this is, since in physics all charge fields travel toroidally like donuts, that you can visualize whether the seed is alive or dead, whether it's plasm or plasma charged donut is in fact turning inside out recursively. We've talked about how turning inside out ness is the physics of the symmetry sequence of Sefer Bereshith, the first letters of Bereshith, the first word of Genesis, is the sequence of symmetry operations to turn inside out on a surface of a torus, meaning to be or not to be, or at first in principle the origin of thingness, is the sequence of symmetry operations necessary to turn inside out, implode. And so it's a way of introducing the concept that a seed is alive to the extent that it's turning inside out recursively, namely creating electrical suction. And that electrical suction to center can be visualized in a sense, in the seed. In a lot of seeds, you can actually see one of the first things that comes out is a little tube. So effectively, the tube up the center of the germ of the seed is alive or dead if it's sucking. It really sucks, doesn't it? And you could say the same as humans. If you look at a human fetus early on, it's basically a tube that extends and eventually becomes the intestines. And so human beings are basically a torus in a certain sense too, and they're alive or dead if they're sucking down through peristaltically, et cetera, et cetera. So that movement or suction of charge and fluid through center by imploding, turning inside out nests, is clearly a useful way of talking about life or death, as it is life or death for a seed. Now, we have said that when a seed decides that it's alive, not dead, its way of proving that is to tractor beam in its first nutrient, literally electrically suck. So the way the seed becomes electrically centripetal is the essential issue. And so it's obvious that electronegativity, which is related to redox potential, many physicists talk about the electron and the media of electronegativity as a little black hole, a mechanism of suction. And in fact, if we understood how electronegativity was centripetal, we'd probably understand gravity. In fact, if physics understood what how any force field became centripetal, we'd probably understand gravity. We'd probably know why an object falls to the ground. And the gravity field appears to dramatically affect the seed germination. We're going to talk about that when we talk about the stages of the moon. So, long story short, the seed is alive or dead based on whether it's electrically sucking, which is to say electrically centripetal. So anything that feeds that centripetal field of the seed actually adds to its ability to grow. And obviously this is behind our imploder.com technology, the imploder.com, where we make a perfect centripetal vortex for water, making the hydrogen more centripetal, and then we apply extremely strong centripetal implosive conjugate magnetics, and we create a bioactive field in the water. And it's not just increased solubility, increased spin density, but it's increased centripetal force in the plasma charge around the water in general. And we have often talked in our courses about the famous work of Burke and Levengood and their book, Seeds of Knowledge. And basically they showed that with many pictorial examples, actually I think we have some in the little slideshow here, from Seeds of Knowledge, that, let's see, that is slide number 24. Let's see if we can find it. That, that we talked about how the geobiologists studying the pyramids and dolmen and stone circles, the famous New England Antiquities Research Society, they so famously investigated the stone circles of New England, and they said, oh, we have proved now that they were not used for living inside of, they were not used for burial. No, they were not used to store food. They were not used for this. They were not used for this. Well, what were they used for? Well, they didn't seem to have a clue, actually. But the book Seeds of Knowledge and our work seems to answer that question, which is they were used to cause seeds to grow, and also, of course, facilitate successful birth and death, to make a bioactive field, as we explained, to raise a shem unto the Lord. The shem was the altar in the church, but actually the shem was the stone that generated a bioactive and therefore centripetal field. And remember, the central theme of the whole implosion group curriculum is that a phase conjugate or golden spiral embedded, nested charge field is a symmetry, a geometry, a wave shape. We call it phase conjugate, which means centripetal, implosive, fractal, and negentropic. These are all parallel terms to say what happens to an electric field when it implodes. It goes through a center point, creates adding and multiplying of phase velocities through that center point, which sends the light out through the speed of light at the center, called longitudinal electromagnetics, longitudinal EMFs, sometimes called torsional or scalar. And that longitudinal component is related to how gravity is made. It's also related to what travels out through the center of gravity, for example, through the center of gravity of the Earth, onward to the center of gravity of the Sun, that wormhole of charge that gravity makes that sends a wormhole of charge between the center of the Earth and the center of the Sun, sort of well depicted in Jodie Foster in the movie Contact. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about what happens, how the moon affects seed germination in a minute. But first, we're going to talk about that book, Seeds of Knowledge. So what they said in Seeds of Knowledge, and this was the book by Burke and Halberg, and also then Levengood later. Levengood actually built the high voltage charge devices they used just for a matter of seconds and minutes to trigger seed growth. They got 30 to 50% dramatic difference in seed growth by simply treating them with a high voltage field, which is part of why we firmly believe that our Therify.net is going to be one of the most powerful and effective seed growth triggers known to man, actually. And we've already shown to some extent that it's very effective for treating water, aside from treating people. And we have some partners now lined up to do the seed growth trials, etc. So we know that plasma, creating centripetal phase conjugate, implosive, negentropic fields, can treat seeds as well. We're quite confident. There's a lot of work to do, though, because we have to determine the exact duration of the charge fields, etc., the time, and we know that the smaller seeds need a shorter zap period than the larger seeds from Levengood and Burke. But the nice thing is that we think we understand a pure principle, whereas before, when they were using these high voltage spikes, they weren't able to extend it to a pure principle. I see that Thomas Geckler is here with us. Thomas is our host and sponsor for the Therify.net project there in Georgia, outside of Atlanta. And he's been very patient. We're finally getting the corrected gadget amplifier back to him. And thank you, Thomas. So he's going to help us do that testing. We have many allies lined up. And thanks, everybody, for your patience there. Thomas, we had good news that London and Bosnia have confirmed for Therify installs the Bosnian pyramid will be demonstrating rejuvenation with the Therify. It's confirmed. It's all wonderful. Thanks to Sam there. So things are going well. So what Burke and Levengood showed in that book, Seeds of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, was that they had a dramatic effect on this. In the picture here is of corn growth, of seed growth from the stone circles and dolmen arrays. Now, their sort of conclusion in that book was, well, let's run around the world and find ancient sacred stone circles in order to treat our seeds. My conclusion is, let's do the electrical engineering of pure principle and build the bioactive field to cause the seeds to grow. And that is what this course is about. It's also what Therify.net is about. Tobias says the effect of exposure seeds to high electric field have been written about in German. Great. It'd be nice to have some references. I think there's probably lots of examples in the literature, but to really assemble that work and to distill it to a pure principle. My passion in life is clear. I think that once you have the pure principle, the essence of the principle of how anything works, then you're empowered. Then you transcend the religion and the mythology, and you go to something that's actually immortal, sustainable. When I was a kid, one of my favorite books was this book it was called How Things Work. And my view was, you should really not use any gadget unless you understand the pure principle, how it works. Because the more gadgets you use whose pure principle you do not understand, the more disempowered you are in your world. But when you can feel the pure principle of how it works inside yourself, you probably know how your toaster works, but do you know how your television or your microwave, do you know the real science? The more you understand about how things work, the more you're empowered in the world. So that actually distills to a deeper principle, a deeper pure principle, which is that when you die or when you have bliss experience, what you inhabit is the pure ratio, the pure principle. Actually, the essence of what's behind the wave interference itself, the pure geometry, the pure principle. And when you inhabit that, you inhabit something which is quite literally immortal. And that's the wave you ride during bliss experience, transcendence experience, deep spiritual pure principle. And the more pure principle you understand deeply within, the more that the charge of the universe comes to you because you deliver that charge into a shareable wave, which is precisely what you take with you at the moment of death. And what heart coherence measures, we could carry on about pure principle. So I'm pretty passionate about this idea of teaching our kids pure principle. Thank you, Tobias, there for notes on the urzitecode.com, alternative to genetic tech using field effects. Wonderful. Yes, I had seen that somewhere, but so great that you brought the reference to us, Tobias. Thank you very much. Great stuff. Yes, wonderful. And leave it to the Germans. They knew about phase conjugation. Ich bin ein Berliner, said Kennedy. So, what we're saying here is that one of the main principles of the ancient stone structures was to fabricate a centripetal and therefore bioactive field. And that when the ancients said, the most important thing I have to do in Sumerian is raise a Shem unto the Lord, what they meant is, I have to make a bioactive field, otherwise, not only are my seeds not going to grow, but I am going to age catastrophically, which is reported in detail in the Sumerian. So bioactive fields were their solution to age regression, literally time reversal, literally rejuvenation. So Sam at the Bosnian pyramids, he travels the world. We have lots of fun with Sam. And his whole lecture is about why 500,000 people now are coming to the Bosnian pyramid every year, reinventing the economy of their Bosnia, specifically, most of them, for the rejuvenation effect of the pyramids. So this is what we're going to really try to talk about. Sam has done a lot of work there, the infrasound and all that stuff. But we really want to discuss that tonight, about how and why, what is the actual electrical mechanisms which allow pyramids to make a bioactive rejuvenation phase conjugate, a time reversing negentropic field. As Sam bravely, he's digging up serious economics to get a Therify installed there, because he understands so well that a rejuvenation field is the heart of what a pyramid is for. I love this. I feel like, Implosion Group is the Hermetic project, in my view. Teach the principle of life force phase conjugate, caduceus, the whole shtick. So if ever there was a Hermetic project on the planet, it is to teach the physics, the pure principle of implosion, which the Therify is, conjugate, centripetal, negentropic, the whole shtick, broad spectral phase conjugate. So I'm so delighted that the Boheme, after the Prague meeting with the Bohemians, remember, and Lil's name for Enki was Boheme, Bogemite, Bogomil. After the Bohemian meetings in Prague about Therify, Paul will go to Bosnia and do that install late June. It's lined up. It's cool. It's fun. So, raising a Shem unto the Lord, which is later translated to mean altar in church, actually was to build a bioactive field and a time reversal field. We now know in phase conjugate optics that time reversal is very specific. It's very well described in physics. And time reversal, as far as I can see, always means negentropic, which means increased order. I believe, if I understand the physics correctly, that you cannot time reverse to decreased order. Very important physics, because actually what time reversal means is going backwards in time toward the pivot point of maximum order. You can take something back to the fetals, but you cannot, well, the way we joke about this is you can time reverse rusted steel back to unrusted, but you cannot do the reverse. So actually, time reversal only means negentropy and rejuvenation. You can't make something disordered. You can only make something increase in order. And this is very important in the way phase conjugation in optics has been used to self-correct aberration in microscopy, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're in the process of understanding what a bioactive field here is. We're also meditating on how the ancients knew about rejuvenation for age regression. And I mean simply taking biology back to its place of maximum order. there's extensive description, I mean, long, detailed descriptions in Sumerian and in the Bible and in Anton Parks about the ancients, which I think were the largely Anunnaki Draco, the Uru, the Uras. We talk about that in the other course, but that they're always their constant complaint is, well, we arrived here and the atmosphere caused us to age catastrophically. That's all over the Sumerian. They were used to an electrical environment which prevented aging. And I say to you, as an electrical engineer, that one of the primary functions of architecture is to make an electrical environment that prevents aging, which is very similar to, say, making an electrical environment that prevents biologic decay. Now, biologic decay is essentially or quintessentially the same as sustainability for all biologic electric fields, which simply means the definition of sustainability for electric fields, which I say is negentropic fractality, that phase conjugation by creating negentropy self-organization in an electrical field, defines sustainability. And all conversations of sustainability and environmentalism should start right there, because that's what I call a pure principle. Exactly. Mark is asking, can proper architecture help hair grow back? Well, we have some reports that the imploder.com has helped gray hair become colored again. However, in my case, it doesn't look like it. It doesn't. Well, yeah, I have to admit that I haven't consistently been drinking the water from wells, but we know the gray hair is related to mineral solubility, which is related to charge density, which is related to hydration, which relates to solubility, which is related to implosion. So you see how these things fit together. But yes, and by the way, back problems. There's so many problems that are related to hydration. But which is where, the imploder.com, that's our major ad, is that hydration is not just a solution to bioactive field water for plants, but implosion is a solution of health and bioactive field for people. And, drinking imploded water clearly has this effect, and it's a universal report. However, we don't advertise the human so much, because obviously then you have medical claims and all those issues. But it is true that it's a very healthy thing, and we can prove it just in the sense of solubility, which we can prove, equals hydration. Hydration is the issue of so many diseases. And hydration is basically the hydrogen. I mean, it's named after hydrogen. The hydrogen atom is implosive, negentropic, phase conjugate, and that's the center of the water bond structure. So you get that spin density, you get centripetal force there, and restored centripetal forces is the subtitle of the implosion group project. So we now have an insight about ancient stone structures and their real purpose. It was not just to save agriculture, and that's what the book Seeds of Knowledge was about, but it was also about saving the shamanic lineage. It was about successful taking of memory through birth and death. And Phil Callahan, our friend, we made a film with him, talked about the stone towers in Ireland, so accurately tuned to the dirt level in the stone tower for the 1,000 hertz when the time came for using it for birthing, because that's measurably anesthetic, for example. So they were tunable like organ pipes. And further, then he showed that the stone towers were making a bioactive field. He talked about the microwave frequencies. Wonderful work there with Professor Callahan. So essentially, like the altar at Machu Picchu and the sacred sites were used for successful birth and death. And then we see that by placing the stone centripetal or conjugate dolmen at the magnetic line cross points, like the Cozy Rev mirror, metal cylinders, they would measure the magnetic lines over a critical amount of nanoteslas where the centripetal, the cross point of the magnetic line creates a blind spring or JED, which is either centripetal or centrifugal. And it was necessary to place the Cozy Rev mirrors accurately on the magnetic line Earth grid cross points if they were to work. And when they worked, what did they measure? They measured telepathy. I mean, they measured telepathy. DNA radio, druid phone calls, mitogenic radiation, lots of names for this stuff. But the principle is that why was it that, and Korotkov did this work very scientifically. First he measured the GDV, but then he measured the statistical success, accurate scientific trials of telepathy, thousands of miles apart, these cozy rev mirrors placed on the magnetic line crosses, Earth grid, Dodecki, COSA crosses, and they got measurably successful telepathy, druid phone calls. And now we know the physics, a lot more the physics of why, because we know the ADP, ATP, major microwave of the cell mitogenic radiation, the DNA radio, is precisely phase conjugate, bang on my equation to Planck. So we know the phase conjugate collapse wave is part of ATP, ADP, how the DNA makes its microwave, and that's how Bob Dratch scanned for Kundalini in the microwave. Now, how is that going to get over to the other side of the planet if it's not in a phase conjugate longitudinal array? So obviously you need to place these towers at the magnetic line cross points to make DNA radio work and to make telepathy work. And then this also relates to Korotkov's beautiful measurements, where he followed the Kogi to where they made phone calls to their ancestors, and we talked about this in biologic architecture, that the capacitance, actually the charge distribution efficiency of the air was measurably peak, which is, say, quite literally fractal air. The definition of Sion to branch perfectly, ion. The fractal air defined the sacred space, and that was always measurable in the place where the Kogis made their phone calls to ancestors. What does this tell you? Well, phone calls to ancestors means that this phase conjugate longitudinal implosive array is the mechanism of the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, ancestor memory, tremendous survival value. It's the media you inhabit after you die. And whether it's the Aboriginals of Australia or the kin of Atta, either way, they know that every day your biggest job is to hear your ancestors. What do they mean by that? They mean that this is the river of ancestral memory. Hopi will tell you the same thing. That burial ground of the Hopi, had to be maintained in fractality because ancestor memory. And this is true of virtually every indigenous tribe. The ancestors' memory in the burial ground needed to be fractal so the ancestors' collective field effect could be sustainable. And that sustainability is defined as a phase conjugate fractal field.com. In other words, we now know a lot more about the physics of how you embed your charged plasma after death into an electric field called ancestral memory, which is exactly what a phase conjugate dielectric, how it's described in the book Alice in Barium Titanate Land. So maintaining this fractal field and understanding phase conjugate dielectrics, phase conjugate implosive fractal fields, perfecting charge distribution, not only defines sustainability, but also defines ancestor memory, permission to enter the collective unconscious, and where and how to do birth and death. Because getting your human plasma and the gene plasma and the implosion plasm and the plasma imploding and conjugating is how you hook up the plumbing to this collective memory. So, water, Mark is commenting, water becomes my food, yes, and it is coherent with the vacuum and seeds use it to germinate. That's right. And the water, we talked about the center bond of water is hydrogen, fractal, implosive, and water. We like the joke that says water invented people because it wanted to walk around. Another joke I like is if you ever want to prove that water is self-aware, drive a carload of kids past a rushing river and notice that they all suddenly need to pee. It's because the water inside you is always looking to join the river of the collective unconscious. This is why it's not so good to sleep over running water, because your plasma, your aura, is always looking to join. I mean, it's very appropriate to understand the geobiology of these things, and the actual charts are at goldenmean.info/geobiology. Thanks in large part to Stefan Cardino probably the world's most advanced geobiological studies. They're outside of Geneva in Switzerland. And it's true, quite measurable. You walk over an underground water vein and you measure the presence of that water by measuring the fact that your aura collapses. Your aura gets smaller. So why is it so dramatically measurable that when you walk over an underground water vein, your aura, your charge, your cold plasma field, your boat into the underworld, gets smaller? It's very measurable. It's not subjective. The GDV, there's a dozen ways to measure. No, it's real. So what's the physics? Why does your aura get smaller when you walk over an underground water vein? Well, let's connect that question in 1 minute to exactly why the magnetic rivers of the planet get dramatically smaller during an eclipse. This is very measurable, very solid. It's not subjective. It's hard evidence. So when you walk over an underground water vein, the reason your aura gets smaller is the plasma inside your body is always saying, I need to get immortal. I need to get immortal. I need to join a sustainable wave. This is what the plasma field inside your body is saying to itself every minute. The same thing the plasma field inside a mountain is saying to itself, and the same thing the plasma field is saying to itself inside the seed, which is to say, reconnect with the central implosive river of charge going through the heart of, the heart of, the heart of, the heart of, the heart of you, the heart of the earth, the heart of the sun. And so that's the implosive phase conjugate river to which all living fields must commune, and they know it deep in their collective unconscious. So when you're walking over the underground water vein, the reason your aura gets smaller is because your aura says, oh, that is a connection. That's a place where my plasma can go and get to a sustainable wave. So your aura goes boop, 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 and slips out. So you do not want to sleep over underground water veins. This is why a good geobiologist architect, when he builds a house and there's underground water veins under the house, he puts the walls over the water veins so people don't stand there or sit there or lay there. So the next thing we want to use then is this this example of, as is so well proven, the magnetic lines of the planet. We could dig out some of the pictures of this, but the magnetic lines of the Earth do something very similar to your aura walking over that water during an eclipse. So the Earth magnetic lines collapse during an eclipse. It's very measurable. And we'd like you to understand exactly the electrical engineering of why, to help you understand not just why the moon is critical to seed germination, but a deep understanding of the conjugate physics of gravity. A follow-up to last night's conversation. Let's see, Tobias says, because of the electric field envelope. Yeah, basically what we're saying is that the aura of a human is a cold plasma field. It's a cloud of charge, plasma, which does not need heat to remain centripetal because there's something conjugate, like cold plasma, the whole article, fractalfield.com/cold plasma. So life force exists as a cold plasma field, and what keeps it centripetal, that's hanging together, what keeps your aura hanging together is something implodes or is phase conjugate at center. In the case of the cold plasma article, that is monoatomic materials, which are phase conjugators. In the case of Therify, it's a noble gas, which is a phase conjugator. In the case of Star Trek, it's a dilithium crystal, Captain, which is a phase conjugator. So we want to play with this mystery about the stage of the moon in order to understand something about life force and bioactive fields in seeds. First of all, hopefully no one will argue that the stages of the moon are one of the most important factors in seed growth. I urge you to look at some of the biodynamic Rudolf Steiner literature. The Steiner biodynamic calendar is an example, but it's quite dramatic. Planting your seeds by the stages of the moon is powerful useful, commercial, scientific agriculture. It's real, it's solid. So somebody like you and me ought to understand the physics. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Because it's so useful to understand. You see, the nature of gravity, the nature of centripetal forces, all of which are phase conjugate in my view, implosive, fractal, iotropic. You know, we're using these buzzwords all night. But the nature of gravity is the golden ratio cascade, like in the geometry of hydrogen, and the pent geometry of every living protein, pent, golden ratio, allows the phase velocities to add and multiply recursively constructively, creating acceleration of charge toward the center out of only that geometry of compression. And the name for that acceleration of charge towards center caused by phase conjugate compression, the name for that in physics is called gravity. So what happens as the waves add and multiply on their way toward the center, the phase velocities go through the speed of light at the Planck sphere center. This is the subject of last night's, the phase conjugate, reason that gravity exists, and the reason that rainbows exist and life force and that perception exists. So, what is gravity? Effectively, but a squirt gun to accelerate charge through phase velocities, through the speed of light at center. And we know what that center is exactly, precisely. It's the Planck sphere. Mark's whole conversation last night about the ratio of the radius of the proton and the electron is based on this sphere called Planck. And you take the Planck sphere and you add and multiply recursively by golden ratio, and you get my whole book. You get photosynthesis frequencies, Schumann resonance harmonics frequencies, brainwaves frequencies for bliss. You get this perfect Caduceus cascade, which is the frequency recipe for all biologic negentropy. And that's why it's the cover of my book at fractaltevil.com. So, the mystery of the moon. So what's happening? Imagine you're a Sufi, and is it called a Stella Natura calendar? Thank you, Lisa. Another example of a planting by the moon calendar. Cool. The star nature calendar, which is an introduction to the physics of astrology. And this is very much what this is about, is the stars are adding, multiplying these phase velocities, and they're sending these wormholes here and there of these tubes of charge going through the speed of light, which is how stars and planets experience gravity relations erotically, to quote Gurdjieff. And if you watch in the movie Contact, you see these wormholes, which are the gravity tubes between the phase conjugate fractal centers of gravity. So you have a center of gravity, the Earth has a center of gravity, and the Sun has a center of gravity. And the Sufi master is explaining what you need to do in order to do the Sufi dervish turn without getting dizzy. And remember, if you're a young dervish and you cannot do the Sufi dervish turn without getting dizzy, it's highly embarrassing. Because your dervish master is intensely aware that this is literally the physics of pure intention. So if you have pure intention, you will not get dizzy. Now let's have a physicist explaining why getting dizzy is proof of failure to have pure intention. The Sufis are absolutely convinced of this. I mean, and they're not dumb. This is time travel physics 101, the Sufi dervish term. No, but what it is that to keep your phase relationship to ground, phase relationship to ground. Why is that the definition of pure intention? You're watching this movie, Medicine Man. I think was it Sean Connery? In the movie Medicine Man, did you notice the incredible sense of balance of those little Native American, the native children, the pygmies, the small indigenous children? The children they had this fountain and there was this narrow, and they were all just perfectly balanced, walking around like tight ropes for no problem. In fact, Native Americans are famous for being used on high building construction because of their sense of balance. So what is it about access to ground having been barefoot on the same land for 1,000 generations, which is equal to a perfect sense of balance. It is your electrical reference with respect to all phase discipline. So access to ground is access to fractality, is access to perfect charge distribution, which is perfect reference to get you embedded. So access to ground, which means access to a fractal, has the same meaning for an electrician, a place where all charge can be distributed, as it has to a psychologist. What does it mean to be ungrounded? It means your thoughts and actions do not have a phase discipline or a reference to the collective. Which is why it is so critical, provably so, the book Earthing. We talk about it in every course here. But, good grounding means, well, I just got them. My slippers have leather and real wool, and I wear even thinner leather in the summer. And so I get some electrical ground through this, and so I'm not schizophrenic, Basically, your ability to get electrical ground into your body is so essential to so many aspects of health because it provides phase discipline to the phase conjugate core of all charge. This is literally your connection to the collective. That's why it is so unhealthy to live in high buildings where you don't get the Schumann resonance. I mean, they don't publish this much, but I believe there's proven disease data that all disease is far more common for those who live above the 3rd or 4th floor of most buildings. It's true. And they hide this fact because they want to sell the buildings. But the fact is, if Schumann resonance can't reach you, it ain't good. And the Schumann resonance doesn't get very far up these metal buildings. And the Schumann harmonics, we now know, newly, thanks to the cover of my book, the Schumann harmonic cascade is a phase conjugate collapse wave. It's negentropic, it's implosive, and that's called access to ground. Okay, so where were we? Oh, yes. First a question. Is dirty electricity a consideration of grounding? Yes, that the spurious harmonics in your 50 and 60 cycle are even more destructive because they're even more opposed to phase conjugation. Incidentally, we're studying this very closely now because, when I wrote the equation on the cover of my book, Origin of Biological Entropy, Planck length times exponential golden ratio, that harmonic series lands bang on, 49.96 something to 50 cycles. That means 50 cycles in Europe, for example, is phase conjugate collapse participant. Whereas 60 cycle, no. And we know that 60 cycles is a frequency at which the voltage required to stop the heart is lowest. Hello, it means, sorry, Mr. Tesla, when you chose 60 cycle, it was anti-biologic because it was anti-phase conjugate. The same way the color green is the opposite of conjugate and therefore prevents photosynthesis, why every plant spits it out. I think the exact title of the book Earthing is Earthing. Isn't it? Yes, I'm pretty sure. You just look, Amazon.com, Earthing. It's pretty, and there's websites. It's all over. It's very famous work. And David Wolf talks about. Everybody talks about it. It's good work. It's very useful, and this science of grounding is beautiful. So back to the Sufi master. I don't know who the author of Earthing is, but I think one click here we can find who the author of Earthing is. Earthing book. Let's just see here. Earthing ranks. So 500,000 results. First link on Google. Earthing, the most important health discovery ever. Author Clinton Ober, O-B-E-R. So one click in Google and yes. Okay. So we were talking about our yes, actually. So that's what we're saying, that earthing is implosive, more implosive than explosive, because it's phase conjugate. Remember, Schumann harmonics, perfect phase conjugate caduceus cascade wave. You take the actual published frequency signatures of Schumann, and Greg Braden seems clueless, and you'd actually take that harmonic series, and you're within a few percentage up and down the scale of those harmonics on the cover of my book for golden ratio exponents of Planck time. meaning the Schumann harmonic series is what makes Gaia negentropic, self-organizing, self-regulating, and we can fix Gaia if we understand how to build something negentropic, which is definitely more implosive than explosive. You know, if we believe Schauberger, implosion is the solution and explosion is the problem. Hence the bumper sticker for implosion group. By the way, I think in French there is no term for bumper sticker, so sorry about that. So we were trying to track down the Sufi master. The Sufi master says that if you wish to not get dizzy, you must be able to track the center of gravity. And the word center of gravity, I believe, is actually used in the Sufic tradition, which is so profound. You have to track, which in my view is the phase discipline. Track the center of gravity from your heart, like a wormhole, like a vortex, like string theory, like a phase conjugate cone, down into the center of the earth and find the heart of the earth and track that with your attention. And when Bentov wiggled the aura of the whole earth, and he did it with his Kundalini, this is exactly what he did. That's what his book, talking about the pendulum on the physics of Kundalini, is about, embedding perfectly in earthgoldalini.info/Kundalini Bentov's story, who was my teacher for Kundalini, is talking about pendulum. So here he's embedding and phase locking his plasma centripetally, and then he wiggles the whole earth as a living body. It's the Jesus story, except anybody can do it. Hello. So then the Sufi master says, track the center of gravity of your attention to the heart of the sun. Now, we know that the human heart and the heart of DNA and the heart of the sun and the heart of hydrogen have all been elaborately mapped. They all have exactly the same symmetry called Anu, 7 spins inside, 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. And that is, and we have whole courses on that, the heart of the sun being the heart of the human, being the heart of the hydrogen, being the heart of the quark. It's all the same slip knots, the Anu. So when your attention gets into the heart of the sun, you have created a thread, an implosive slip knot, a string, literally a wormhole, literally a string, you know, there'd be lots of terms in physics, which connects your center of gravity, and the phase lock is the superluminal component of the longitudinal, through the heart of the earth, through the heart of the sun. Now we have a whole course on what it is for shaman to see through the heart of the sun, and that's not the subject of tonight's conversation, but you can find it by researching the Solar Heart Community, typing this in, at yahoogroups.com. And that's what was a whole bunch of shamans who had seen through the heart of the sun. And any good shaman knows how to see through the heart of the sun, and it's an eyeball, it's an organ of perception. It feels cool and inviting, and you can see through it if you're good. But if you can't, unfortunately, you're probably not growing up yet. And if you want to graduate from kindergarten, you got to get there. But that's the advanced story. We're at the introduction at this point. We're telling this introduction right now in order to understand the role of the moon with these seeds. We're getting a clue now. So the conjugate theory of gravity says that out the center of gravity of hydrogen comes a wave of charge going through the speed of light because it's been conjugated, and phase conjugation is the physics of how you make longitudinal waves. That's not new information, that's old information. And phase conjugate made longitudinal waves is how you make waves go faster than light. The fact that longitudinal electromagnetics goes faster than light is old information. That's not new information. It didn't come from me. It's well known. So, but my phase conjugate theory of gravity requires that the major part of the faster than light superluminal wave will be at golden ratio multiples times the speed of light. It's one of the ways I propose to test my theory of gravity, is that when we measure waves moving faster than the speed of light, they're disobeying Einstein. They didn't ask Einstein's permission. No, they just did it. Ain't it cool? So when Professor Raymond Chow measured waves going faster than light, he measured, one of the velocities he measured, primary one, was 4.23 times c, the speed of light, which happens to be golden mean ratio cubed times the speed of light, which would be a proof of my theory of gravity, that these waves move faster than the speed of light times golden ratio. It's just the way it's faster than you multiply golden ratio times Planck length and time. You measure Planck golden ratio times the speed of light to get the superluminal components of the phase conjugate longitudinal, which is connecting your center of gravity to the Earth's center of gravity to the sun's center of gravity. And that's a wormhole. That's a connection tube. That's DNA radio. That's ancestor memory. That's an important connection. Now, what happens when the moon gets in the way? This is going to help us think about the physics now. This is going to help us think about the physics of astrology. It's going to help us think about the physics of why the moon affects plant growth. The moon, the NASA seismic data, I believe, is rather clear. The moon is probably hollow and probably metallic. And so it is virtually certain that the electrical structure of the moon is the opposite of a phase conjugator. You know, you can read about Ingo Swann, Dark Side of the Moon, pretty scary, nasty stuff, You know, when the lunar craft landed on the moon, it rang like a bell. They set off a seismic little blast. It rang like a bell for minutes. So the moon is like a hollow metal bell. That's what it's like. And the hollow metal bell of the moon is not biologic material. It's not a phase conjugate. So what does that mean? Well, phase conjugate structures like the Earth grid and the heart of the sun, and here's our Star Mother Kit model for the Earth grid in City of Revelation in Jerusalem, Ezekiel's wheels, and the new physics of hydrogen and the new physics of the cause of gravity, goldenmean.info/kit, Star Mother Kit, the mother of stars. That is a wave geometry, the physics of hydrogen, which by being phase conjugate achieves charge distribution. That means that the adding and multiplying can go on forever. So that's why if you plant a seed in a phase conjugate material, biologic material, it'll grow. You put a seed in a stone cup, which is, you know, high dielectric, it'll grow. You put a seed in a steel or aluminum cup, it ain't going to be happy, because it's phase conjugate means harmonic inclusive. Harmonic inclusive defines life. This is how you measure for immune system in heart rate variability. Check for that. Harmonic inclusiveness. We have that article, goldenmean.info/holarchy, about harmonic inclusiveness is how you measure for immune health in heart rate variability. And that's old information, thanks to Dr. Irving Dardig. So what does it mean that the moon is opposite to a conjugator? It means that when the moon interferes with that wormhole, that tube of faster than light charge going between the Earth and the sun, when you break that connection between the heart of the Earth and the heart of the sun, when the moon breaks the connection between the heart of the Earth and the heart of the sun, that charge superluminal wormhole, that string theory going between the center of the Earth and the heart of the sun, when you break that string, what happens? Well, again, pure hard science here. Full moon, the hospitals fill up. We know that. Eclipses, every single ancient culture knew that full moon and eclipses is not a time to do a witch's dance. No, the full moon and the eclipse is the time to duck, to hide. Why? Because, well, for example, it's extremely measurable that the magnetic lines of the Earth collapse when you have an eclipse. What's the physics? In fact, this is one of the most basic tenets of geobiology, which is that when you, this was Vincent Bridges' teaching, that if you get your whole new stone circle all rigged up and ready to go, the time to put the center stone in, which is to say, time to put the water into the new plumbing, when do you do that? You switch on and off the plumbing when the pressure is off. And when do you do that? What, during the eclipse? Because the magnetic lines collapse. So you can install new plumbing for the Earth magnetic array during the eclipse because the magnetic lines go. Pfft. Now, why? Any geobiologist on planet Earth could prove to you that the magnetic lines collapse during eclipse. I don't need to prove that. That's been done. What I need to show you is the why. And the why is because when the river of charge at the superluminal longitudinal between the Earth and the Sun gets cut by the moon coming between the Earth and the Sun, this means that the circulation of chi, of charge, of capacitance is inhibited because the path down the wormhole between the center of the Earth and the center of the Sun has just been cut. This is like the bloodline. This means an eclipse is a very not good time for birth or death. Bad news, because the biological mechanism of connection. So now you're beginning to get a clue why the phase of the moon so dramatically affects seed growth. Because the ability to maintain that connection down the rabbit hole is so dramatically dependent upon the river of charge going between the heart of the Earth and the heart of the Sun. So now we're beginning to understand what the seed is depending on. The seed is depending on a contiguous flow of capacitive coupling connecting its information reservoir, its sustainability, its biofield, down the implosion cascade between its center of gravity, the Earth's center of gravity, and the Sun's center of gravity, which is why you make a magnetic map before you plant the seeds. And the seeds over the magnetic lines grow better because that radio is working better. And that's why the phase of the moon is. So now that this is not just about understanding the physics of astrology. Actually, is it waxing or waning? I think it's when the moon is waxing. Let's see. When the moon is getting bigger, it's unpacking, and that's the growth path. When the moon is getting smaller, that's packing. It's very well differentiated in the biodynamic literature. Remember, adding to the packing or centripetal force, and remember, packing, unpacking in physics is called plus and minus charge, centripetal versus centrifugal. In Tai Chi, it's called, or in Eastern religion, it's called yin and yang. But in every case, I feel the term centripetal and centrifugal charge is a more accurate term because the meaning of yin versus yang has been reversed several times through history. And Roger Green, who teaches our Feng Shui courses, versus Michio Kushi had the opposite polarity for yin. So very confusing. And even when we have our magnets shipped in from China, and they say they put the red dot on the north side of the magnet, if you get it here and you test it, you measure it, in the West, what we call magnetic north, that's what they call magnetic south. So using the term centripetal and centrifugal is far more accurate than using terms like north or south or yin or yang, even plus and minus charge. Although electronegativity in physics has more precision of definition. But I say that electronegativity is centripetal, and any physicist will agree basically that an electron is a small black hole, just like Nassim is saying a proton is a little black hole. And what they mean is it's a phase conjugator, which is to say the Tom Bearden bumper sticker. I think this one should appear. Tom Bearden was our teacher in phase conjugation papers in the suffix of fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. But Tom Bearden, his main conclusion, or his bumper sticker is, treat the nucleus to a phase conjugate pump wave. What he means is the compressional wave is not just what holds the nucleus together. Say plasma containment is how you make mass out of charge. That's what phase conjugate pump waves do, that the nucleus is held together because it is a phase conjugate pump wave. The phase conjugate pump wave, the golden ratio harmonic series, the quartz cube, and you have Minkowski-Frost, you made gravity. So phase conjugate pump waves are what holds nucleus together. And so that is how you reach in to the radio at the center. That's basically phase conjugate pump wave is how you impedance couple to mass. And that's a sacred mass. sacred ritual, because it's actually how you make that connection. It's why the impedance of the vacuum is so associated to this ability to get a phase conjugate pump wave accurately pumping the nucleus, hydrogen, for example, or the Minkowski-Frost piezo crystal for gravity making, for example. So that the phase conjugate pump wave pumping the nucleus, which is Tom Beard's bumper sticker, is exactly what this is about, to reach into the information, to reach into the wave node of information communion. Point of information communion being the Planck distance, for example, the Planck sphere, the phase conjugate center point, where the charge goes through the wormhole, through the speed of light, becomes longitudinal, and enters that communion of saints, that gravity wormhole phase relationship. That is the physics of astrology, the real physics of astrology. And the new moon is in the way at that time. Good thought, Eden Gray. So we should really apply this now to understanding how the new moon versus the full moon is telling you when's the time to plant and when's the time to harvest. Because during the one time it's centripetal, that's the time to plant. And when it's centrifugal, unpacking. And that's even why the imploder was chose for the North Pole in for both germination phase and fruiting phase, whereas South Pole in magnetics, pushing into the water, was good for the germination phase, but not good for the fruiting phase, because it gets all spindly, basically. So, because the fruiting phase is more when the plant is setting fruit, what does it have to do? It has to compress to make the seed. Whereas when the plant is in the germination phase, it needs to decompress. But remember, this is the core principle again, that all successful decompression, which is say all successful charge radiance, is always preceded by successful compression. So successful compression comes first, phase conjugate fractality, then you can do successful unpacking after you've done successful packing. It sounds like how to pack for an airline trip. It's really true. Don't bother unpacking until you've packed well, which is say you get the centripetal force into the center of the vortex, and then the radiance from that point will emerge with phase discipline, which is to say golden ratio geometry, which is to say phyllotaxis, which is to say Shion, science, perfect branching, Eon, John, the perfect distribution. So the perfect packing always must come first. That's why the seed has to experience the centripetal force to trigger it so it's ready to unpack after it has all the charge stored of perfect packing. So Thomas Geckler says he's building his vortex traps. Thomas Geckler, CherokeeGold.net, builds amazing concentrators for monoatomic Ormes-like material from water. You know, from deep sea water, you can concentrate the Ormes trace mineral, the Ormes emulators, and because the Ormes responds differently, it's pushed away from the magnetic flux, you can concentrate the Ormes in water with these magnetic traps, which is very parallel to what we do with the imploder.com. And Thomas is saying he also builds his vortex traps with North Pole inwards. By the way, Thomas, that would say that one of the super imploder magnetic units should be ideal for. We must test that. Good thinking. You know, to concentrate the deep seawater into agricultural Ormes, you add a powerful caustic high alkaline, and then you get this milky trace mineral that precipitates out, and that's then dried, and you have agricultural Ormes. It's beautiful stuff. And the deep sea water, the Kangen waters, for example, is higher in the rhodium, iridium, and and there's various ways to concentrate this, but magnetism, when it's centripetal, concentrates this, and Thomas is saying he's using North Pole in, which is the same conclusion we came to with the super imploder. So very cool. There's 3 books on magnetism and health, and they're all the same. They say the North Pole is the unpacking direction, and so they say that you put the North Pole of the magnet on, and it'll distribute the charge and reduce the pain. But if you put the South Pole magnet on, it will increase the pain, but also centripetally increase the rate of healing. So to think of North and South Pole magnetics as centripetal versus centrifugal is very helpful to getting your understanding of polarities sorted out. And the top graphics in our article on that is central. Here's the article. This is the link where we do a graphic description of the difference between North and South Pole to understand that that difference is primarily the difference between centripetal and centrifugal. You know, start by putting the South Pole magnet on your toothache, increase the pain, but increase it. Whereas if something hurts too much, you put the North Pole on, it unpacks the pain, but reduces the healing rate. Because the healing is triggered by the centripetal, which makes it more self-sorting. Okay. So the next example we were going to use to understand these physics of bioactive fields was Agnihotra. So this is obtained from the Agnihotra Center we worked with in Poland. I think some of the pictures are at goldenmean.info/Polish, and the principle of Agnihotra was described in the book where we talk about the physics. But basically, what we noticed there at the Agnihotra Research Center in Poland was that all the farms around were impoverished. And there was this one farm, which is the Agnihotra farm, it was a Garden of Eden. The place was just blossoming with life all over the place. But they had been developing the Agnihotra ritual there for many years. So they have an underground phase conjugator, which is a pure copper and gold pyramids are phase conjugators. So they have an underground pyramid like this underneath. And then on top, you have this dish, which is this phase conjugate copper or gold pyramid. Phase conjugate dielectric implosive capacitance, not unlike the gold cup principle. You feel a little bit of negative ion wind in the center of these gold cups. And when you put it over your aura buzzes, just like the crown of the king, because it's implosive capacitance. It's just like, I felt that so much. It doesn't take long. So in Agnihotra, you put the cow dung in here, very highly biological material, dried cow dung, and then you put ghee, which is hopefully organic, clarified butter. So it's a highly biologic plasma flame, and you light that plasma flame exactly, and I say exactly, precisely to the second of sunrise and sunset. Now here's the physics. First of all, the reason I studied this so intensely is when I sat next, they had a computer to tell them the exact second of sunrise, and they lit that flame, and I swear, I felt a shiver through my kundalini. It went up and down my body, and I could tell exactly. In fact, my hair stands up even at this moment, just remembering that moment in Poland. So I was determined to study the physics. So what happens is you have a phase conjugate plasma flame inside a phase conjugate capacitance, and hopefully it's aligned on the Earth grid in phase conjugate array above a phase conjugate underground invert pyramid. And then why do you light it precisely at sunrise and sunset? Remember, those who did Agnihotra in Bhopal and those who did Agnihotra at Nagasaki and Hiroshima were said to survive. Why? Aside from creating an agricultural Garden of Eden. Fertility. So sunrise and sunset, you have a precise 90-degree, 180-degree angle to the plasma flame. And a precise 90-degree, 180-degree angle is called a phase conjugator. And that means the heart of the sun can commune in phase conjugate precisely with the plasma in your cup. So whoever invented Agnihotra, in my view, had to have understood phase conjugation. Phase conjugate optics is the way to understand Agnihotra. So this is an example of a bioactive field generator. We call it the soma. So very active, very powerful, and very good physics. And this is another example where we look at spiritual tradition And if we understand the physics, it goes from miracle worship to self-empowered science. And that's when we can end the religion wars and instead use a perfectly shareable, self-empowered science in which, as Lucifer said, you too can be God. No, you too can inhabit the pure physics of the essence of the creative principle, the only meaning, real meaning of the divine, which it literally means the perfectly branched. Okay, we have a question here. How does the seed information, centripetal moon phase, relate to modern sprouting to grow seeds in anything at any time? Well, I can tell you that, what we're saying is seed germination is dramatically responding to implosion technologies. In fact, one of our most successful seed germination trials with the imploder was in Australia with Chris Dean, who is the director of Organic India, and he did the sprouting trials. And we had 30 to 40% growth increase in sprouts using the imploder centripetal force. And also I can tell you that in hydroponics, implosion technology does super. The imploder.com is famous for success. Ask Jason in hydroponics, and that's one of the top films at the imploder.com and fractalwater.com. So the moment of sprouting is the essence of the test of everything we're talking about germination and life force. Okay, so now the other aspect of the science that we wanted to talk about, and I think we're going to dedicate this section of this evening's conversation to Sam Osmanagich and the Bosnian pyramids. We're going to send this film to Sam. He's a great guy. You can remember, he's selling the fact that the Bosnian pyramids create rejuvenation. So we wanted to use pyramid science, the real Hermetic project, as an example of how to teach what a bioactive field is and how rejuvenation is created in, for example, pyramid science. Speaking of the pyramid. So what Sam noticed was that his measured rejuvenation effect, I mean, people came there to be healed from all these diseases in Bosnia. What he noticed was that the places where the rejuvenation effect was greatest correlated to maximum negative ion wind. Literally, the negative ion count. Where the negative ion count is highest, maximum rejuvenation. Simple. This, by the way, is very consistent, well proven with the medical literature. The medical literature is these days quite clear that negative ion wind is essential to healing. That's old information. It's medically proven. We always use the example negative ion wind therapy, Joyce's cell care therapy in Scotland. Negative ion wind therapy worked best in areas which were grounded, and it would only work if you were wearing biologic materials. If you were in a room full of synthetics, negative ion wind therapy did not help immune health. Whereas if you were in a room full of phase conjugators, then negative ion wind therapy worked much better. And we believe, in fact, that's literally true of Therify.net. In fact, in the new protocols for Therify.net, we talk about that. That synthetic clothing and metal on your body inhibits the ability to charge implode because they're opposite to conjugate. So before you go to your Sufi master, before you go to your lover, before you go to Therify, you remove the synthetics and you remove the metal and you remove the restriction so your body can charge implode, which is to say, recursively build charge. So, negative ions are fragile. If you study, and they're actually doing this now in hospital science. Oh, they finally documented negative ion wind therapy is essential for hospitals. And then they discover, oops, negative ions die very easily. If you have a big metal surface with all kinds of electrostatics and crap charge on it, it's going to kill every negative ion for many yards. So electrosmog is poisonous to negative ions. Negative ions are an indicator of implosive charge. So, you know, when Sam climbed down in the Bosnian pyramids to the underground passageways where the rejuvenation effect was greatest, which is where we hope to test the therapy, the plasma rejuvenation, phase conjugate plasma. That's where he measured intense negative ion wind concentration. So, clue number one, rejuvenation effect of pyramids is correlated to negative ions. You could prove that. Clue number two, Sam was measuring what he called infrasound. Remember when they were documenting, I think there's a TV special about this, we should dig out the film, one of those great Discovery Channel ones, where they're climbing around down in the hypogeum under Malta, and you can see our pictures and study on that at goldenmean.info/Malta. So they're climbing around down there and trying to figure out, well, how the sacred space under Malta, the famous hypogeum, how did it work? And the short answer, to shorten the story to the Maury, the short answer was infrasound. It's infrasound. And then our friend Stavros, Professor Stavros from Greece, who works with Lydia in documenting geopathics in sacred space, who was determined to prove that where's the book? That the holy fire of Jerusalem only shows up when a Greek Orthodox priest speaks the prayers in Greek. But anyway, that holy fire, that living plasma ball, you know, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, the presence, that holy fire plasma, which shows up in the sacred tomb under Jerusalem, also in certain Greek islands, but it only shows up when the infrasound is correct. So how did that work under Malta? The infrasound was basically low-frequency sonics that phase conjugate, and they serve to do plasma compression. They literally make a standing wave of sound compressional potential that holds the flame of charge with what I would say would probably be a phase conjugate or implosive or centripetal phonon sonic geometry. So Sam has correlated this under the pyramid, and he says these very low frequency coherent sounds are correlated to the maximum rejuvenation field of the pyramids. So that was our clue number two. Now remember, the best infrasound around, the frequency series of human brain waves to making bliss. I just got to grab the picture. Here we from the picture on the cover of my book. That's going to be my bumper sticker. From the picture on the cover of my book. But no, that's the picture on the cover of my book of that frequency series. And I'll read it. So the calculation is 2.78, 4.5, 7.29, 11.8, and 19 hertz. The actual frequencies of the Schumann harmonic series, not 2.78, but it's 3. It's pretty close. It's not 7.29, but 7.83 hertz. Very close. It's not 11.8, it's 14.3. Pretty close. And then, instead of being 19.09, it's 20.8. So there you got 1, 2, 3, 4 harmonics of the Schumann harmonic series within about 1% of a perfect phase conjugate pump wave down to the wavelength of Planck. What does that tell you? The perfect infrasound. And by the way, guess what frequencies Elizabeth Rauscher used to eliminate pain in magnetics? It's that same equation. Guess what frequency series literally exactly makes the therapy work? Same equation, etc. Frequency series of photosynthesis. You get the picture. My whole book is about that. So that's called a phase conjugate pump wave. So the perfect infrasound is a phase conjugate pump wave. And now the pyramid is concentrated in that. That's right. The Schumann resonance harmonic cascade, not a single frequency. No. The Schumann harmonic 7.83 hertz is just one of the harmonic cascade. The complex wave shape, which looks like a caduceus, the known harmonics, multiple harmonics of the Schumann harmonic cascade. So Greg Braden was wrong. It's not one frequency going up. No, it's a set of frequencies that's becoming more harmonically inclusive called going to the next dimension. It's a harmonic cascade. It's implosive. It's phase conjugate negentropic. That's how Gaia is self-organized. So now we got this infrasound, which is being concentrated under the pyramid, phase conjugate pump wave. Now we have the negative ions indicating centripetal, negentropic, little black holes electrically, and we have something else. Harmonic cascades ocean. Yes, that's good. We have the walls of the pyramid. So Sam is studying this. The walls basically have these layers. You have highly piezo rock powder like quartz and calcite layers, highly piezo layer. And then you have a layer of what's equivalent to muscovite or shungite. And muscovite and shungite, like the stuff that Karatov devoted a whole website to, with the stuff that Nick Nolte uses to make the water purifiers. It's just a phase conjugate dielectric capacitance. That's what orgone really is. And he put the shungite in originally glass spheres and later plastic spheres, and Nick Nolte calls that structured water. Well, it's simply a phase conjugate dielectric. It's a capacitor that's a little bit implosive. That's the physics behind grander water as well. And that's what we do with the imploder.com, but we do it in another way, because when the water is a bit piezo, which is, say, highly mineral or hard water, and remember, magnetics and the imploder was discovered in hard water because you eliminate calcification. And when the water is conductive, piezo, or hard or mineral rich, that makes the capacitance of the vortex a phase conjugate, which means the charge of the vortex nozzle of the imploder is implosive. I should have one of the nozzles over here. I should have brought the gadget over here. So the vortex becomes piezo, a phase conjugate dielectric, and that means electrically centripetal. Remember, Schauberger's vortex, we talk about this in every course, Schauberger's vortex in his books on implosion, only began making electricity from gravity when they spontaneously started getting colder. So the water vortex starts getting colder, and then you know you're going to get charge from gravity because of the piezo effect. And he had it charged with rock powder, piezo. That's why the imploder is so wonderful for biodynamics, because it's perfect dynamization, it's perfect vortex, and the biodynamic preparations are rock powder, piezo. So this is a vortex becoming centripetal implosive. So now I got these layers of this pyramid wall, the outer walls of the pyramid. You've got piezo, rock. You've got phase conjugate dielectric, shungite, muscovite type stuff. And then you've got a layer of clay with high dielectric materials. And what does that do? So now I got perfect phase conjugate material here, and I got this perfect phase conjugate pump wave down below, infrasound, negative ion wind. What's doing? I'm concentrating the centripetal force. Phase conjugate dielectric, phase conjugate magnetic, and maybe somewhere in there, phase conjugate optic. The broader the spectrum of the phase conjugation, the more implosive and centripetal, and the more the rejuvenation. That's why I think it'll be so cool when we bring the Therify to the Bosnian pyramid, because now we add the optical conjugation. And guess what the logo of the Therify.net is? It's the plasma tubes shown in Egypt, which they said were light bulbs. And they weren't light bulbs. They were plasma phase conjugators to make the rejuvenation field. And that's the logo of Therify.net. So now are you getting a flavor for how it is that pyramids become bioactive field. This is bioactive field engineering 101. This means that, well, it means for one thing that the Russians, who have just spent millions building pyramids, screwed it up because they put steel and aluminum in their new pyramids. And those are opposite to conjugate, and it's going to ruin the charge implosion. So steel and aluminum are the poison of pyramid construction. I'm sorry, you guys in Russia who just spent millions, but you wasted it because you didn't understand the electrical engineering. And remember, just a review from our biologic architecture class, the reason the steel and aluminum were poison to more than just pyramid construction. Steel and aluminum are poison to all living architecture because, aside from being not a high dielectric material like biological materials. Remember, in biological materials, every molecule says, I want to join the club called life. It gets fractal instead of getting dead and rearranges this geometry to be more fractal, and those molecules then achieve charge distribution called high dielectric, otherwise known as organic materials. So all living materials rearrange their inner molecules to be more phase conjugate and therefore fractal charge distribution. Whereas steel and aluminum are the opposite. They are harmonically exclusive. The number of frequencies that you get when you ring steel and aluminum are exclusive. There are only a few harmonics. Whereas phase conjugation is the opposite. It's harmonic inclusiveness, which defines life. So basically, steel and aluminum short out the living capacitance. They prevent the charge distribution that causes life. Remember, we're not saying that iron is evil and steel. No, iron is part of life. But the heat that was used to make the steel fuses the iron into an electrical geometry, which is the opposite to life because it's an opposite to a phase conjugator. And the heat that fuses the bauxite into aluminum, which is an electric current, is even worse, even more painful. And you can prove it because of the health research reports of how many people die in aluminum manufacturing. It's terrible, terrible for your health. In fact, there's a half a dozen major global catastrophes. Iceland, there's a huge number of global catastrophes which are basically aluminum manufacturing gone wrong. Aluminum manufacturing is one of the most poisonous activities on the planet, and planet Earth says, oh shit. Gaia says, oh dear, every time a new aluminum plant gets opened up, because it's like a wound on the surface of the planet. So the planet is always trying to push away these wounds, which are the aluminum manufacturing. So naturally, you can find there's a whole list of planetary catastrophes related to aluminum manufacture, because aluminum manufacture is bad, bad karma. I mean, quite literally, from a pure electrical engineering perspective, aluminum manufacture is bad karma. And the planet Earth, we'll assemble that literature sometime. There's a whole list of catastrophes associated with aluminum. Anyway, back to our point. So now we understand how and why pyramid construction fabricates a bioactive field. Now, while we're having that hermetic conversation, we should understand what pyramids are essentially doing, which is when they create plasma implosion, which is to say a bioactive field, pyramids also, therefore, from the center point of leverage create plasma projection. And plasma projection is, in a sense, the definition of shamanism. A shaman is a plasma projector. Basically, how did you get the soul of the pharaoh into the sun? You use a squirt gun. A squirt gun is a pyramid. Well, it's a plasma projector. You line up the plasma implosion to project the plasma, this aura of the Thoth, and you line up those tubes and you squirt it with the right alignment of the sun with the stars, and the plasma can embed. Remember when Anton Parks says that Osiris Enki is being reconstituted into the orbit of Venus. We know the orbit of Venus is pent, recursive, fractal, pure golden ratio, gorgeous stuff. The orbit of Venus is self-awareness embodied. So that is a logical place to restore the, to bring Osiris back. That's what actually that's actually what he meant in the movie when he said, "I'll be back." No, it's where Osiris's body is being green. So you cannot incarnate into something that's not phase conjugate. It's fundamental. So you arrange bodies. That's why the Earth orbit and the Venus orbit are precisely golden ratio in time and phase conjugate precisely to Planck time. This is my original work, because you have to rearrange these orbitals to be phase conjugators in order they can be embeddable with living plasma, which is the definition of incarnating within. This takes on very practical implications. A way to think about this is when they say, well, you only fall in love with pure intention. What they mean is you can only embed in a shareable wave. this means probably a bad idea to fall in love with a steel building, because your plasma cannot embed in there, can't get recursive, centripetal, and fractal, and therefore sustainable as a wave. It can't continue imploding. So do not fall in love with steel buildings, because your love will be unrequited. In other words, do not try to incarnate. It would feel like being crucified to try to embed your plasma in a steel building, because your plasma would be poisoned. Your plasma would be frozen. You would be crucified. This is the real meaning of crucifixion, in the sense of to be crucified across of time and space just simply means, or to get up off your cross and follow me, literally means to get up off the cubic geometry of a wave shape that does not permit embedding, and follow me into the perfected charge distribution called Hey Ave, Hey Heaven, where the Hey, the breath of charge, fiveness, takes flight. Ave, which is called the plains of Sharon, and the Ezekiel's wheels, or it's called the Champs-Élysées, Elysium. These are all names for the place where charge distribution is perfected. So if we'd stop using our dumb spiritual terms without the actual electrical engineering and start doing the electrical engineering, then we could be in heaven. Okay, I think there were some questions in the... Do we have questions here? What about copper? A lot of buildings have copper wiring. It's copper's dead. Actually, at Golden Mean, John Wong, to answer your question, at goldenmean.info/architecture, we have a table of materials which lists sort of a hierarchy from poison to beautiful. And in that hierarchy, poison was aluminum, less poison was steel, and better is iron, and better yet is copper, and better yet is silver, and better yet is gold. Because basically, the closer to get to conjugators, and we know why gold is a conjugator and the noble gases are conjugators, because the outer electron shells and the nucleus all do exactly this. So they provide an implosive phase conjugate charge path through center, achieving distribution to the core, and therefore they support life. So copper is sort of in the middle there, actually. It's not so bad. That's the table at goldenmean.info/architecture. That's right. And the table is also, thank you, in one of the PDFs, in the PDF for the Sacred Architecture class at fractalu.com. Also, we have the table. I should have that table here in this class, but anyway. Tobias said, Google nuclear powderized crystallized by nuclear singularity. World Trade Center. Oh, interesting, interesting. We could get into conspiracy theory, but maybe we'll leave that for the moment. So we were supposed to talk about maybe, first of all, the slideshow for tonight's class is similar to the slideshow we used in the earlier class. And so it's by way of review. It talks about the Bloom the Desert project, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll go through that briefly here. But I would like to do one more summary here in terms of the implications of bioactive field science in terms of a science of death and a sort of spiritual science of sustainability and mortality. Let's talk about the science of birth and death. Okay, supposing we really took this bioactive field theory stuff to heart, and we then wanted to electrically engineer successful birth and death. You know what a healthy birth canal looks like? If you do the wave shape for the centric pressure wave over time for love, it's also the wave shape of the perfect birth canal. And if you draw that curve, you notice that the maximum point of compression on that curve is that golden mean ratio into the curve, which is, originally that was discovered that when you squeeze someone or hug them to say, I love you, that the maximum pressure over time comes at 0.618 into the duration of that squeezing process. That's all at goldenmean.info/touch. So, which is the Sentix literature. It's the psychophysiology of music, that the shape where you touch a violin string to speak different emotions, that the pressure wave over time that says joy when you're squeezing a violin string reaches max pressure 1/6 in the duration. But the wave, and the wave that says anger and is 1/3, it's destructive interference. But the wave shape that says love is tantrically delayed in the arrival of the maximum pressure point. So when you squeeze someone's hand or body to say, I love you, it's a completely different geometry of pressure than when you squeeze someone to say, I'm feeling joy now. The joy max pressure is 1/6 in the duration of the event of that hug. Whereas the love hug significantly tantrically delays the onset of max pressure until 0.618 into the duration of the hug, which is also the physics of the perfect birth canal, the true physics of rebirthing. So, we know that rebirthing and birthing is essentially the physics of getting the perfect squeeze. We now know what the perfect squeeze is. It's called phase conjugate, which is literally fractal and implosive. So if you want to bring lots of memory through birth and death, what do? You design a compressional environment. So for rebirthing, they use belly of the surrogate mother, John Diamond, profound rebirthing. They use placental extract, deep breathing. They re-emulate that squeezing process. It's an important solution for cases of cesarean section. You know, Caesar made war on the Druids because he couldn't bond with his mother, and therefore couldn't bond with the land, and therefore couldn't bond with. And therefore he murdered the Druids. He couldn't feel. The reason he couldn't feel was because he couldn't ground. The reason he couldn't ground because he didn't have a birth canal. And so the birth canal achieves that squeezing process, which establishes the phase lock called ability to bond. And I worked for many years with Joseph Chilton Peirce, who wrote The Bond of Power, which is beautiful on this subject. That the reason Caesar couldn't bond with his mother, and therefore couldn't bond with his family, and therefore couldn't bond with the land, and therefore couldn't feel the feelings of others as if they were his own. So the therapy for the cesarean section, Caesar's failure to get a birth canal, is profound remothering, which is literally this ability to create this geometry of pressure that allows you to re-emulate that implosive phase lock moment of you couldn't get a better squeeze, the logo of the well-designed tomato juicer. This designing the perfect squeezing process is the perfect phase lock to bond. And you see, that's why in a good birth, the mother has bliss as well as the baby, because there's this implosion process called phase conjugate, where all the memory of the positions of the stars at that moment are crystallized. It is the physics of astrology. It's a gravity-making event. So, introduction to the physics of perfect birthing, but you see what this has to do with perfect deathing. The ability to distribute your charge after death. You know, Korotkov measured this process. We have this whole article on this with the pictures, goldenmean.info/immortality, about what happens at death. So Korotkov is measuring, you know, the number of hours after death it takes your aura to leave your body and where it goes, when, and why. Your aura, your plasma, your ghost goes to the point of charge, implosion, compression in order to find distribution. And that's called saving your soul, embedding in the collective memory. And what do you see at the moment of death? You see something called the Clouvet form constants, K-L-U-V-E-R, Clouvet form constants. And you can see the pictures at the link, goldenmean.info/immortality. Basically, the Clouvet form constants are the sequence of geometries always seen consistently by near-death experiences and LSD experiencers and a few others. And why do you always see this sequence of geometries in that sequence? Lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And then it starts over. The reason you see that, it's the sequence of braid operations in your DNA creating charge implosion called phase conjugation, which allows charge to be imploded and embedded into perfected distribution, which is how you get into the collective memory. So that's why there is a map to dying, and it's the brain sequence of your DNA, because your memories have to be imploded and then distributed, which is literally phase conjugated. They have to do non-destructive compression, which is exactly why you see your whole life rush before your eyes just at the moment of death. You're experimenting with the compression, which is why if you do that every night before bed, you close your eyes and you relive, you play the recording of your day until you don't have to interrupt, which means you've processed all the memories, which means you've phase conjugated them, which means you've distilled from each experience only that which was perfectly shareable, and the rest you let go. Let go and let God? No, let go and phase conjugate. So when you get so good at encountering every experience in life by merely asking what is the collective unconscious learning from this? If you approach each experience in life like that, suddenly you never store an unshareable wave. And biology only invented death to gently persuade us to stop trying to store waves which are unshareable. That's the reason biology invented death. Because if you think pure principle at every moment, which is to say you're focused on pure charge distribution, every moment is simply essence. You're looking at life from the point of view of the eyes of the collective unconscious. Every time you do that, your hair stands up. You attract charge. So if every moment all your thoughts are focused on pure principle, that means you're always attracting charge. And you know what happens when you always attract charge? This is a test question. What happens when you always attract charge is you never die. And this is, if ever there was a Christ principle, Christos, a perfectly shareable wave, that's it. Is this an apology for Christianity? No, this is an apologia for the physics of what it is to crystallize, to crystallize, which is how to get a wave that's shareable. So let's apply that to plasma and bioactive fields. So you see that the hygiene for designing successful birth and death for individuals and for collective species. Look, our collective species is probably going to have some kind of collective near-death experience. It's coming. How can you have virtually every single successful movie these days is about some great post-cataclysmic whatever? Obviously, the collective unconscious is focused on collective near-death experiences. Why? We are doing Groundhog Day with collective death experience. Why? Well, if you get it right, then you don't have to do it again. So let's get it right. Let's understand what it takes for a collective memory to go through death. It's very simple. And the physics is clearly teachable, and it has to do with designing a phase conscious. It means the magnetic map of the hospital and the deathbed and the burial ground all has to look like a rose. That's what it means. Remember when we wrote that lovely article by Kareem on the physics of pain, goldamean.info/pain. And this doctor, who was the professor of anesthesiology, New Jersey Institute of Technology Medical School, Kareem, with myself, we played with this article on the physics of pain. Basically, we were trying to say pain was not a mistake made by God. Someone's girlfriend once thought testosterone was a mistake that God made, but then someone said, no, but actually testosterone is not a mistake by God. And pain also is not a mistake that God made. No, it has a purpose. The purpose of pain is to redirect your attention to where phase conjugation needs to be restored, which is exactly the same as saying where compression can be restored. So by restoring phase conjugation, which is to say restore compression, charge distribution is restored, and that eliminates pain. That's why, for the therapied, the majority of the people who have arrived with very specific pain have some solution to their pain with Verify.net. The reason is because the phase conjugate is massive, broad spectral, successful compression, which is the electrical opposite of pain and cancer for that matter. So by restoring compression, you eliminate pain because pain is simply there to invite the placement of attention to generate charge compression. Remember, Bill Tiller proved it cannot be argued that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. That is Bill Tiller, one of the world's leading physicists' book called Conscious Acts of Creation. So no one can argue that focused human attention causes electric fields compressed. That's been measured. No, the reason then that focused human attention can reduce pain is because it restores compression. So the psychology of this, bioactive field psychology, is this. Supposing you have a pain in your foot. Instead of saying to the pain in your foot, or wherever the pain is in your body, oh, my damn foot broke down again and it's causing me pain. What a pain in the ass. No. Instead of saying that to the pain in your foot or wherever the pain is, here's what you should say. You should say, oh, dear, wonderful foot, thank you for giving me this useful feedback called pain so that now I know where to place attention, charge compression, to restore phase conjugate charge compression, therefore charge circulation. So you have this dull throbbing pain in your foot. If you totally focus on the pain, and this is exactly what you should do in the Verify field to direct the centripetal force, you focus on the pain. So you focus on it, and you steer the charge compressing, and then the dull throbbing pain turns hopefully into a sharp burning pain, the true homeopathic principle, focus the pain. And the sharp burning pain suddenly turns into a little bit of a glow. So your attention restored compression, centripetal force, eliminated the pain by making that area more phase conjugate, restoring implosion through that center point, restoring the charge circulation, which defines life and life force. So why did I start talking about that? Oh, because Karim, who wrote the article on pain with me from the medical school, did another experiment on this. He was an anesthesiologist in a hospital. He taught anesthesiology. And the experiment he did is he arranged a bioactive field, stone dolmen, literally sacred stones, your pet rock. He put sacred stones in a pattern like a boat around the operating table. And he did statistics very carefully. And he measured a dramatic reduction in the recovery times in surgery when this stone circle was around the operating table. Exactly like Seeds of Knowledge measured the seed germination effect of a stone circle. So he, for example, for a tonsillectomy, they have an average number of days it takes to recover. Well, they measure this, and they do statistics on various surgeries. And the stone circle dramatically reduced recovery time. Why? Because it was centripetal. That same stone circle can be used to help people lucid dream in a group, which is very good for teaching people how to collectively survive death, which is what you do in a bliss temple, which is what Jerusalem and Stargates were all about. Collective lucid dreaming, collective plasma projection, going through death. Essentially calling the mind and body, or the body and spirit separate, was dumb. It's all charge. Matter is charge, and your spirit, your aura, is charge, but matter is just compressed charge. This is classic physics. So your plasma field, which can contain perception, you can take it with you. You can take the memory with you if the plasma field is coherent with. So you practice lucid dreaming, you practice dying every night before bed, and then you can take it with you. It's very simple physics. It's not about religion, it's about physics. It's about self-empowerment. Okay, Mark's question, is that why I have so much static charge in my body? I get electrical shock by the time I slightly touch. Am I overcharged? Oh, this is Liz. Well, if you're more grounded, you'll have less static charge. The static charge is actually relatively bad feng shui because it means you're building up charge. I mean, it depends. If the charge is a conjugator and you build it up, then you can use it for projection. But if you build up too much charge, which is out of phase, then it's geopathic. So the idea to keep yourself grounded, of course, is to use grounding materials and to keep enough moisture in the air so you don't have the static shock. But then when you're in a phase conjugate environment and you're able to build and hold that charge from within, then you're like Jesus, who said, oh, I just noticed someone touched my coat. They communed with my plasma. I bet you that that coat was a biologic material. I bet you that coat was hemp. Joseph's Technicolor coat. Okay, Robert Rivard. Regarding moon travel, in light of recent controversial discoveries showing Stanley Kubrick testimony on camera on the moon being landed by complete makeup stage, how do you view this issue? Wasn't Arthur Clarke who showed an energy belt preventing or interfering travel with rocket technology? Well, it's true. There are those who say it's difficult to survive through the Van Allen belts, and there are difficult fields to traverse. And it's true that, the ancient Sumerians said that the only way the Anunnaki got through the Van Allen belts was they needed their nukes. They had to blast their way through. So they were pretty crude, the same way they were crude with their cloning. But it's true, there are certain regions of the stars through which your living plasma cannot project, whereas there are other routes which living plasma travels like a road. And these are literally angel bodies. This is the plasma physics of angel bodies. And that's a more advanced conversation. Introduction at goldenmean.info/ophanum. But there are clues there in the plasma universe physics websites, which are very useful, that when they see the highways for plasma around the universe are highways for the presence of angelic beings. Because when we realize that large phase conjugate plasma fields have intent, and this is the beginning of the science of angelic beings and really how elementals work. So when we understand more about cold plasma, we can study elementals in geobiology. So this gets into some very advanced science. Now, Robert, in terms of your question about the moon science, whether the moon landings were faked, the astronauts who really were on the moon are very insulted when they tell them it was faked. I think maybe some of the early stuff was faked. I don't know, but I do know Ingo Swann, who did the remote viewing on the dark side of the moon and found structures there, man-made structures, and unfortunately some of the plasma parasites. So that's real as well. So that's a deep and complicated question. And I think maybe we won't try to pursue that too much tonight, other than to say that when Gurdjieff said coherent emotion feeds the sun and incoherent emotion feeds the moon, he didn't mean that the moon was the bad guys. It means that you need a structure to embed the incoherent emotion. The plasma that's going down the ladder toward dissolution uses the moon, destructive emotion. The plasma that's going up the ladder toward negentropy and more embedding goes through the heart of the sun. So when he said that incoherent emotion feeds the moon, visualize in the movie Ghost and in the movie Flatliners, when people who have angry emotion at death and they get sucked downward, what's happening is their plasma is being basically sucked toward the more parasitic elements, the heart of the moon. And this is why also I think that what's called the Grim Reaper that comes for you at death if your plasma is not shareable, you didn't have your intention, is probably the largest plasma parasite in the solar system, as Anne Rice described as Ann-Kill, which is probably the body of Enlil. The Grim Reaper is actually a plasma parasite that comes to get you if you're not a shareable wave. And this is real. And this is Plasma Hygiene 101 and gets into some advanced esoteric science, which is not the subject of tonight's course. Lisa says, isn't that we got to the moon how we got off the moon gravity generator? Well, it's true that plasma projection shamanically is very much associated with the science of propulsion in general. That's why we so much think that once we understand the science of propulsion, we'll understand the science of how to get our auras through the heart of the star, which is why we started this project, fractalfield.com/propulsion, which starts with the symmetry of the heart of the sun as flame letter slipknot, plasma projector. You take these flame letter alphabets, it's in the spiral of dawn, you cast shadow in this into the tetra. You have Hebrew and Sanskrit, but you also have the shadow of human heart muscle and how you visualize a sacred letter to project your plasma. It's a vector direction index. And that's literally how you steer the liquid or the magnetics in a spiral and a torus to make the Vimana and the Nazi bell fly. So once you understand translation of vorticity, which is how to make gravity and propulsion, you can understand how to steer your aura doing plasma projection. And that's what that article is about, fractalfield.com/propulsion. So yes, how to make the gravity to fly. Remember, when you're dead or when you're dreaming, you are a plasma ball. That's what you are. Study the physics of ball lightning and why they're so susceptible to telepathy. Plasma balls look like this. And if you're a plasma ball, how do you steer? Well, you get the angle of the spiral of the donut correct, and that's the angle at which you make gravity, and that's how you shoot your jets to steer your spacecraft. I mean your plasma ball. I mean your ghost after death, or your shamanic spirit, a shaman. That's why this whole nature of gravity and nature of living plasma projection are so inherently linked to spiritual science. Gary Clark says, Dan, would you comment in general about astrology? Is there any basis in new physics to the alleged effect of zodiac geometry on life on Earth? I think the Starlight Elixirs literature is a very good, I think John Fox was promoting that work for a while. The Starlight Elixirs was a very good introduction to physics astrology. You take a very specific star and focus the light very intensely on purified water, sacred water, and then that water would have the memory of that star, and you could actually, when you use that water, you could definitely get the psychological impact of that star, right down to what kind of culture was on that star. So Starlight Elixirs is a study in the physics of astrology. Also, when in the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy, and the pictures are at goldenmean.info/Babylon. There, I put the link there. They showed that the reason Cydonia and Giza have the dolmen, like the pyramids at Giza, at tetrahedral latitudes, and I don't think Hoagland really got this, was because that way you can modulate the spin rate of the planet to phase lock embed zodiacal spin. Now, if the little spin, Earth spin, is better phase locked with zodiac spin, that the result of that more perfected embedding is called gravity. I mean, it's called stable gravity. I mean, it's called atmosphere maintenance 101. This was called planet taming in the book 2/3 there, which is the subject of that article, goldenmean.info/Babylon. What that means was that, you know, planets like Earth are on this tightrope. If there's too much mass, you get atmosphere but no life. But if you get too little mass, you get no atmosphere, and so you can't have life. So there's a tightrope between just enough mass to keep atmosphere, but not enough too much mass, so you can't have life. And that tightrope of planetary mass to the ability to maintain an atmosphere, that is the Hermetic science. That's what Anton Parks called the life designers, the Kadistu, from which we get our word caduceus, hint, phase conjugation. So you rearrange these bioactive field generators, the pyramids, which in the book 2/3 are called Hummer. And a Hummer is infrasound, you get it? And so the Hummers are planted at the tetrahedral latitude, and they nutate, phase lock the precess of the planetary spin to zodiacal spin. And we have a tool here. Actually, maybe I can find that tool. We used to teach that. We did this for years. It's a gyroscope. Get in the camera there. It's a gyroscope in here. Now this thing is broken, unfortunately, but you would spin this gyroscope. Maybe it'll spin. I'm going to try it here. Now what I'm doing is, by nutating and phase locking the inner spin with the outer spin, this thing would get going so fast it would take all the strength in your hand to hold it. And this is the nutation precession rate, which is phase locked with the spin rate. And when the precession rate is in phase with the spin rate, you can pump the high frequency with the low frequencies. And then it lights up, does all this cool stuff. It takes all the strength in your hand to hold it. So this is the precession rate, and this is the spin rate of a planet. Now, when the precession rate is phase locked with the spin rate properly, this precession rate becomes a pump wave called a phase conjugate pump wave to the spin rate. And this is coupling the inertia of the low frequency here, this frequency, with the high frequency. And when that's recursive, called phase conjugate, the long wave embeds the short wave in a phase conjugate golden ratio, and you get the translation of vorticity from the long wave to the short wave called gravity. And that creates stable gravity. So it's a way of stabilizing the gravity around planets, and therefore atmosphere. It was an exercise in atmosphere maintenance, which is gravity maintenance. Now, if you happen to have a planet like Earth, which is losing its atmosphere, oops, it might be good to learn about planetary embedding to societal spins and atmosphere maintenance. Now, oh, this one is called, what is it? You're asking what it's called. This is called Powerball Neon Blue. And this has a digital control panel as well. See the digital control panel? And unfortunately, this got used so much in 10 years of seminars flying around the world every year that it kind of is fried. But they're gorgeous toys. They actually use them to teach for people to get wrist strength, because it takes so much strength to hold them. But the point is, the quality of grace, the physics of what Sister Mary Sister Mary Nun meant by walk down the aisle on the way to your first communion with the quality of grace, what she meant in physics was learn this phase relationship of the long wave to the short wave, so that you would then not be a jerk, not get out of phase. And the quality of grace is that phase embedding, and that's how this is familiar. So this is an introduction to physics of gravity, because the physics of astrology, because it's actually about this nutation of the little spins into the big spins. And it's true that planetary orbitals and galactic orbitals, there's this whole paper, it's called spirosolaris.ca. It's a whole website about the golden ratio everywhere in planetary orbitals. It's everywhere. I just did a few of them. I newly discovered that the Earth and Venus orbitals are precisely golden ratio to each other and to Planck. That was my discovery. But there's all kinds of literature about the golden ratio all in the solar system, because the golden ratio is gravity maintenance. That's what physics doesn't know and needs to desperately, because that's what stabilizes gravity, called conjugate gravity, the title of the article. And then you have all this literature about the geometry of the masses of the universe are a dodecahedron, which is to say making more gravity than would be expected, eliminating the need for this theory of dark matter, as we explained. And then you have this whole golden ratio in the structure of the proton, which is last night's course. Gary Clark says, pumping the noble gases with lower frequency excitation. Yes, well, in the Theraphyte, clearly we pump the noble gases with the precise lower frequency cascade. The actual low frequency cascade we use for Theraphyte is right there. But then we take that precisely in phase conjugate phase discipline to the high frequency megahertz area, precisely in phase necessary to trigger that noble gas to plasma excite to glow with phase conjugate optics. And we know that the noble gases are optical phase conjugators as well, like lithium niobate in Star Trek. And so that then the whole cascade from the high frequency to the low has precise phase discipline to be very broad spectral. So the harmonic series can then implode. And yes, we pump the noble gases with a phase conjugate pump wave, low frequency excitation. Hayam says, can you say again why collective unconsciousness is looking for collective death experience? Well, when the singer said, carry Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun, what they meant was it's sort of like in the Gurdjieff gymnastic, they tell you that you cannot learn the sacred gymnastic until after you've discovered how to put your attention into your baby finger with enough electrical force to cause it to begin to tingle. If you notice that you put your attention into your baby finger and then it begins to tingle and burn, that indicates to you that the electrical inertia of your attention has reached critical mass. And now you're ready to learn the sacred dance. The reason your baby finger started to burn when you put your attention there, they called it making feeling, was because your attention is electrically centripetal. And the Gurdjieff people talk about refining the quality of your attention. And now we know exactly what they mean by that in physics. They mean making the electric centripetal force of your attention more precisely phase conjugate and therefore more implosive electrically. And that's why putting your attention in your baby finger can cause it to start to burn. And you're not ready to begin sacred dance until you can. Then, initially, the sacred dance is impossible with one because you don't have critical mass, whereas a group can make critical mass and therefore create a plasma field that collectively can do what the individual cannot. The closing scenes, the sacred dance in the movie Meetings with Remarkable Men. We talk about this all the time. The celluloid in the film making the movie was burnt with that bliss experience of the collective plasma. So it requires critical mass in order to, did the Pope say a critical mass? No, I'm speaking of the physical critical mass, but it's related to the critical mass of the church, which is to say the critical inertial escape velocity for plasma, which is what mass is. So a group can do what an individual can't. It's very simple. So, the very nature of the core of DNA being a hydrogen bond as a phase conjugator means it's a collectivizing device. That means that DNA has been in the business of collectively assembling one collective phase conjugate fractal field for 1 billion years, storing a library of electric symmetries called survival data, the collective unconscious. And that's why when 3,000 people die at once on 9/11, everyone feels that that was measured. It's a capacitive coupling device. And the reason everyone feels it is because it is a privilege to be assimilated. No, because the more the DNA phase locks to longer waves, the more you have bliss experience and store that, the more you can feel magnetic lines, the more you can dowse, the more your aura becomes coherent, and the more you can feel others outside you as if they were inside you, the better you get at turning inside out, the physics of compassion. So the more your DNA becomes a superconductive conductor, a superconductive, which now we know the physics of, a DNA monofilament becomes a superconductor at the moment of crystallization, just like a gold monofilament. You zap it with a little amperage, which is what a bliss experience is. Ask the hero of the movie Powder. And so the superconductive nature of DNA during human bliss is a collectivizing device. That means that the communion of saints, the collective unconscious, is a device for taking the soul group memory through the heart of the sun as a group. And that's what Jesus meant was when even what you do to the least of them, you do unto me. The physics of crystallization there was the ability to feel. This does not mean that you have to die with the pain of every individual. No, this means that what is beautiful about the collective needs to survive in essence. So if you recognize what the collective mind needs, then you ride that wave and you become immortal. Tobias said maybe there were the most special people invited to the World Trade Center, just hence in Dresden, yes, where many people die at once. You know, there's something about eros thanatos, which is willingness to sacrifice. It is said that the more you consciously and unconsciously believe that you're doing your highest level of service, you are then least likely to die, or most likely to get immortal. Whereas if you become unconsciously convinced that you're not doing your highest level of service, this triggers literally the telomeres and the thanatos urge. Remember, it is proven that the gambler wants to lose. So the gambling is the physics of the thanatos, the death urge, because they're no longer convinced that they're doing their highest level of service. Whereas another way to put this is they interviewed the person most likely to die of AIDS versus the person most likely to not die of AIDS. If a person had AIDS and they did a series of psychological questions, and the person with AIDS who answered, "Would you do an unasked service?" The person who answered yes was most likely to die of their disease. Would you do an unasked service? In other words, would you give yourself away in a perfect sacrifice? So the nature of sacrifice is actually the nature of taking your smaller plasma field and embedding it in a larger, non-destructively, ideally. And that is the process. The real meaning of sacrifice is taking the spin at the center of your cross and follow me and embedding it on a bigger cross, which is to say the earth. This is why they say that at the time of the rapture, the guns will melt. What they mean is they're not phase conjugators, they'll generate heat. Just why steel is melted by Brown's gas hydrogen and your hand is not. That's the same reason the guns will melt at the time of the rapture. And this is also why they say when Jesus returns, the dead will rise from the graves. What they mean is when plasma compression becomes massively phase conjugate in a planet like Earth, that the plasma of the ancestors will be accelerated, will be lifted up. And so the ancestral memory becomes explicit instead of implicit. Yes, thank you, Gary. I suspect that the opposite, that the chosen people were prompted to not show up at work in 9/11. You know, if you do your work, then if you're connected to your soul in the sense of Education of Oversoul 7, in my case, at one point, Bentoff, was talking about pendulum, called me his guardian angel when we were doing the Physics of Consciousness Symposium with Bucky Fuller in Italy. And then later, Bentoff died in this great Chicago plane crash. And somebody says, well, were you not a good guardian angel? But it was said that Bentoff actually intentionally wanted to play with the angelic logoi, and he intuited the Chicago plane was going to crash and decided that he was his time, So there's all kinds of ways to look at that. And I don't take a fatalistic view of these things at all. I think the more you become conscious, the more you do have choice. Ultimately, the real meaning of choice is the longer wave you can embed in, the more you have choice, because the bigger the tornado you can steer, because the center of the lowest pressure for the longest wave is yours. Okay, it's 10:14 p.m. We had a little fun here. Powerball, neon blue. Any more questions? Was this a happily ever after? Well, it was a happily ever after in the sense that if we deeply understand the nature of making bioactive fields, we can truly engage in the process of making the human aura sustainable as plasma, and therefore the true spiritual physics of immortality, sustainability defined, fractal field, phase conjugate, etc. And that's the happily ever after, where spiritual tradition becomes a science of spirit, and therefore a shareable wave, and therefore eliminating the need for religion wars replaced with self-empowerment. It's tough to determine whether anything that happens is ultimately plus or minus. Thank you. It's sort of like deciding if something is good and evil. It is more about failure to embed. That, if live, L into the I of 5, phase shift into the focus of recursion, L-I-V-E, to live. And evil is live spelled backwards, which is the phase conjugate optics, which is moving away from embeddability. So ultimately, in physics, the ultimate definition of good or evil is simply evil is failure to embed. And perfect embedding defines Ścian to branch divine and perfect sustainability phase conjugation. So failure to embed is evil in this sense. Is it Thanatos, Thanatos, I think in the Jungians and Eros Thanatos, Tobias. Is it the Thanatos that gets people to eat acidifying food and glue their blood cells into stacks? I like that, Tobias, thank you. Yes, he's referring to the fact that when your blood is acid, the cells clump up and therefore reduce soluble surface and therefore weaken your blood. Whereas when you alkalize your blood, and Ted Baruti, who wrote the book Alkalize or Die, was my neighbor in Asheville, North Carolina. And when you alkalize your blood, it becomes more centripetal, and then the blood cells can stand by themselves. And if you take epitaxial water, Pat Flanagan's crystal energy drops, under the live blood cell microscope, you can see the cells begin to stand by themselves. And individual people who have access to bliss experience do the same physics. The self-empowerment means that they can stand by themselves. In other words, if you have access to bliss, then you no longer need to get your energy from other people. It comes from within. So you're not so dependent on relationships. You, in fact, have your inner wiring, your inner phone call to God, your inner DNA radio is working. And in energetic terms, in bioenergetic terms, this means that until you have your own regular access to bliss experience, electrically you are functionally a parasite. Whereas if you have regular access to your own bliss experience, not only do you have your own inner internet, but you have your own inner source of charge. Ultimately, this is why it's so important to have access to regular forms of bliss experience in order to get an immortal aura. This is why we say that the only real definition of having a culture is the skill to teach your young people how to have a bliss experience. So until then, I challenge every culture on planet Earth to say whether or not you have a culture is whether you have the skill to teach young people how to have bliss. And I say that the Americans and most of the Europeans do not have culture from that real biologic definition of culture. And you could say, moreover, that you could prove biologically that this is true, because biologically you can prove that ultimately to sustain an immune system, you need access to bliss, which is how you not just get biologically healthy, but you get memory through death. So it is a biological truism that you must have a regular access to some form of bliss experience to get your own access to imploding charge. And therefore, it is biologically proven that access to bliss is the definition of sustainability, and therefore the definition of having a culture. And the very word bliss, in the sense of body polis, projectable collective plasma, defines the origin of the word politics. So teaching the science of how to have bliss and setting the environment for young people to have bliss experience defines the origin of the word having a body politic. So now we know what George Bush should have been doing. Okay. John Wong, in terms of architecture, can we create some stone within our house to create a more bioactive field, even if we live in a steel aluminum building? That's a great question, John Wong. Thank you. It's really true. Not all of us can move to some great biologic architecture in the woods. No, we're not able to do that. But you can create the beginnings of your own sacred space. Find your own altar, put your own sacred material there, make your own sacred field effect. Begin to build an altar. It's real, it's good. And what makes an altar is the material that can contain a lot of living biologic charge. So first you get rid of as much steel and aluminum and electrosmog and dead air as you can from your living space. And then you fill it with as much biologic material and mementos and sacred items, and you make a bit of an altar, and you do regular meditation, you pray there, and eventually you make a charged living plasma field there that creates its own microclimate. Do a little labyrinth, etc. So absolutely, we build sacred space wherever we are. Absolutely, that is the right challenge. Thank you. Tobias, pure orgasmic childbirth consciousness. Exactly, that's where we're going with this. And Nassim is teaching that as well, which is great. And the physics of rebirthing has everything to do with this process. So thank you. So I think that might be it for tonight. If you can tolerate some EE and electrical engineering curiosity, do you know what the highest frequency of the therapy excitation energy is? In other words, what is the bandwidth of the drive circuit, megahertz, gigahertz? Well, the high frequency drive frequencies of the Therify are part of the intellectual property. I can tell you they're perfectly in phase locked exactly to the low frequency equation on the cover of my book, which are the low frequencies modulated accurately in the plasma gas. I can also tell you that the 500,000 volts is delivered somewhere in the megahertz area, and you can find out with the spectrum analyzer. And by the way, don't get your spectrum analyzer too close or you'll fry it. But just triggering the megahertz creates heterodynes up as far as the gigahertz, which is what Priori used. So although we may drive our 500,000 volts in the megahertz, we get heterodynes up and down the cascade because we're phase accurate, and that's why you have gigahertz on down. But yes, the primary power is in the megahertz area. Ordinary resonance circuits generate harmonics that are mathematical octaves. Has any invented an oscillator circuit that generates golden ratio harmonics? I have done it with arbitrary waveform generators, but a natural mode for doing this. Well, I can tell you that golden ratio harmonics are proven in the Mathematics of Fusion article, fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. And I can tell you that we measured golden ratio heterodyning in the hydrolysis project in Melbourne, Australia. We were using John Canzias's megahertz golden ratio frequencies, exact phase conjugate down to Planck, for hydrolysis. And by the way, the imploder.com proven in 2 countries 20% saving in hydrolysis wattage by pre-treating the water. So I have seen golden ratio cascade heterodyning in the gigahertz spectrum analyzer we used for that project in Melbourne. So it's real. Golden ratio heterodyning is absolutely real and generatable, and we did it there with an RF signal generator generating the cascade precisely to Planck. And you get golden ratio heterodynes in the RF better if they're fit my equation to Planck. So it's all very cool. Okay, so I guess that's the happily ever after tonight. I carried on. Tobias, architect is actually proposing a Fibonacci fire as the basis symbol of living tree architecture. Yes, so living tree architecture in the golden spiral. Yes, and you know my friend who introduced me to Bucky Fuller, Gus Giacacci, built his house in the shape of one ladder rung of DNA based on golden ratio. Thank you, Eden. Thank you for your compliment. I appreciate it. John Wong says, do you have any ideas about reducing electrosmog in the home, such as EMF from refrigerators and other electrical devices? Well, I will tell you what we did right here. We put the refrigerator outside the door. But it's true that power factor controllers can reduce spurious harmonics in the home, and insulated wiring and relays at the circuit breaker to turn off the flow when there's no amperage being used. There's lots of ways to reduce electrosmog. And maybe we'll do that. When we do the biologic architecture course, which is coming up, we'll do a whole section on reducing electrosmog. And Lisa is suggesting biogeometry.com. You know, the biogeometry.com material is wonderful. Those people are doing great stuff with growth. Unfortunately, most of them don't sort of see the electrical engineering language of that. And so instead of understanding a conjugate capacitive coupling principle, they use the term biogeometry. So I just think the electrical engineering language should be more shareable there. But still, the biogeometry people are wonderful from Greece, from Egypt. We have lots of friends there. So thank you very much. Yes, we'll bring them here and use a little electrical geometry. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Have a great night. We will put this film up at bioactivefield.com tomorrow, and we will become a shareable wave. Blessings, blessings. Robert Rivard, one last question. Is it true to say that the act of focused attention on denouncing negativity, for example, a non-productive action, does it not expand the DNA collective? That's right. Focusing on the negative would be really unhelpful unless it was clear that you could do something about it. So my suggestion is only focus on destructive wave interference when it's clear that you can make the critical difference and change it. If you cannot change it, focus on what you can change and leave your attention away from it. And therefore, your attention will always embed in increased spin and not decreased spin. Thank you, everybody. Sweet dreams. Bye-bye. Conspiracy consciousness. Choose your words wisely. Yes. Have a great night. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.